George, that was outstanding. If I wasn't holding the phone with one hand, then I would clap. Matter of fact, I can't do it right. I have to applaud your efforts. That was good. That was really good. And I apologize that I do not have the technical capability or savvy to splice in your video with mine. Instead, I took notes in my little planner here with green pen. As a piece of paper falls out of it. And I might be interrupted. I hope not. I just got a call from our sapper guy, and I got to brief the CO on a sexual assault. Doesn't that suck on a Thursday afternoon, right before 96? Let me see how fast I can get through this, upload it. I wanted to say that your clarification was absolutely awesome. So you got a piano in the back. I play the piano too. My older brother does too. And I got a guitar over in the corner over there with my trumpet. So I am musically inclined. So we are definitely brothers from another mother. It was clear that you put a lot of time into it, into your response, and much more than the 11 minutes in between, which I was busting your chops for. And I'm appreciative that you didn't get offended by me pinging you on that. And let's try to go through in order. I got a lot of notes, and I might be interrupted, but I will keep this as quickly as possible. Right now, I'm just turning on my camera because I had the game on, but I got a backup camera in my office so I can see if somebody's waiting up there. So if I do this, it's because I'm looking at that. You said, let's see, to be categorized by color because I don't think it's necessary in the confines of the survey. I'm going to read what I scribbled down and try not to be interrupted too bad. Matter of fact, I'm going to close my door so that somebody's not poking their head in. Because you were trying to understand what I meant and which side of the fence that I came down on because you thought that I was straddling it. And the reason that I didn't want to check the white box was so that people wouldn't categorize me by the color, because I feel like I'm so much more deep than that. I feel like people are so much more deep than their skin color. And I didn't feel like in those surveys when they were asking race that it was necessary to put that out there to get an accurate picture of what was going on. So by saying that it is neutral and that it might be a fair way to just put information out there about somebody, I'm not saying that it is a necessary way or even that it's a necessary evil. And I prefer personally to characterize by nationality. In that other video, I said nationality or country of origin or culture. I think that those are more helpful to paint the picture of somebody. And I think that most people nowadays in 2020 see the race and the culture as synonymous. Now it's wrong, like they're not synonymous, because in another video that I was looking at that I think I shared with Carlin and Wayne, somebody was saying, well, what color are, or what race are Egyptians? You know, they were bringing in race to this whole Iran conflict, right? And so somebody said, well, was General Soleimani, he looked pretty white to me. Well, he was Iranian. And so it's super confusing to bring a color into a discussion about nationality. And so they're not good. It shouldn't be used synonymously. And by fair and neutral, I don't mean good or appropriate. I just mean, like, some people, when they're talking about other Marines, they use the color of the Marine to help the person remember what the Marine looks like. So maybe some people say African-American Marine. My squadron guns, also unit readiness coordinator, he's dark-skinned, right? Maybe dark-skinned is not the right way to do it. When Donald Trump spoke to a bunch of African Americans, he said, do you prefer me to call you black or African American? Because a lot of us, like, I don't mind being called white. I'm more tan than white. I have olive complexion. I'm not freckly, but it's a way that other people can say, oh yeah, that guy, the white guy, you know, if it's a bunch of maybe Hispanic people. And you know, it's just like, we can't agree on the way to refer to people because we're so afraid to offend people now. If we could get to the point where we were colorblind or we were just like neutral, then it wouldn't be an offense to call somebody something. Now, maybe yellow, maybe red, maybe it is bad. And at the end, you mentioned that the children's song was very spiritually and racially loaded, and I was not familiar with every race and grace, the modification of it, but it probably is better to avoid that, I think, to avoid all the confusion because of all the past. Because what I'm not saying is that it has never been weaponized. I think I wrote that down. I'm not saying that it's never been used as a way to harm people or categorize people in the past. I just don't think it's as much these days, 60 years after the civil rights movement. And I think that if people are weaponizing the color of people's skins and categorizing them, it's not because that race exists. I think it's because sin exists and they're sinful. And I think if race didn't exist, if color didn't exist, they'd find some other way to categorize them. And I think that you see that nowadays because of the sexual orientation, because of the gender, because even age. I read an article there was a Twitter just this morning about a Republican congressman up in New York saying that people were discriminated against because of their age, because when they're older they can't work as hard and so they get fired and they can't find a new job. And I'm just like, okay, now they're discriminating based on age. And I actually tweeted back and said that why can't private companies just hire whoever they think could do the job better? And if it's a younger person, then it's a younger person. Why is the government getting involved in that? So and another thing about neutral, like the reason I say it's neutral is because I don't think it really matters. And I'll use a sports analogy. Like the Rockets played the Portland Trailblazers today. I like basketball. And I saw that they were playing earlier, had meetings. I went to lunch with my wife and I asked the waitress to change the channel because the Lakers were playing. I don't care about the Lakers. And it doesn't really matter who won the game. Some people think that it matters. Some people celebrate that they won. Some people mourn when they lose. They actually lost today. While I was listening to your message, I had the Lakers game on and it showed that they lost. But I don't think that it should matter. I think it's kind of a neutral, absent thing. So, and that's just my thoughts, my feelings about it, and hopefully that helps explain why it's not a contradiction. Because I understand that it's an apparent contradiction to say I didn't have the problem of checking the race box, but I'm not saying that race is the problem. I'm saying that a light needs to be switched implies that there is a problem, because it implies that there's darkness and the light needs to come on. Now, if I'm a bat and I fly around in the dark, then it's not a problem for me if the light switch is off, because I can see where I'm going, because I don't need to see. I use sonar because I'm a bat. So that's an analogy. I've used sports and animal analogies so far. But what I do see is a problem is people trying to put other people in a box, people trying to characterize other people, you mentioned diagnosis. And I think it is kind of a problem when people diagnose other people. This is going to be a longer video, but I'll try to keep it short, and I'm talking really fast, so I apologize. My bristling under being diagnosed is probably based on past feelings of mischaracterization because of what I'm saying. And one of the statements you made was that my responses are what were evidencing those things. And I don't disagree with you that it looks a certain way, but the difference is what things look like sometimes aren't what they are. Reminds me of Shakespeare's Hamlet when he says, "Seems, nay, it is." And, we get those mixed up a lot of times. You could see me in this uniform and you could think that I was in the Army because it seems like I'm wearing camouflage. But the reality is I'm in the Marine Corps. We have a different camouflage. So Carlin will like that example. And there's tons of other ways that you could articulate that. But it's very important for me to receive those kind of clarifying questions instead of restating the way you think that I see things. And Carlin and I have butted heads on this over and over, because he will say something in a way that is what he received from me, but it is almost sometimes 180 out from the way I intended it. And I'm like, how on earth am I being so misunderstood? And I went back and forth with him. I had this realization that I explained to him, that I am in control of what I mean up to the point when it comes out of my mouth, and then I lose control over it. Like, the other person has control over what I meant to say, and they can twist it any way they want. And we see it in politics all the time. And I have to do my best to be very specific in the words that I choose so that I have less of a chance of being misunderstood, but I'm always going to be at risk of being misunderstood. So I went through those two. And I just felt like you were trying to convince me that I had a problem, and I think that's what I had an issue with. I think anytime somebody spends time with somebody else and tries to convince them that they have a problem, they're going to feel diagnosed, they're going to feel a certain way, and so I was bucking up under that. And I think that I absolutely loved your response to my confirmation bias talk, and the fact that you recognize it and are in agreement with it. It really warmed my soul. I was like, well, thank God, at least he recognizes that. Because one of my biggest problems with people who are biased, as I see their bias, is that they don't recognize it. And one of the things I'll throw out there is that I am biased. And I try not to, to me, like, being biased right or left, liberal, conservative, I feel like that's a little bit less severe than when it's unrecognized than having confirmation bias that is unrecognized. And I guess it's just, we just have different levels of priority the way we see things in our minds. Trying to get back to my notes here, that talk about recognizing a problem without causing more problems. I understand where you're coming from there, and I think we're on the same page. And I recognize sometimes when I have pointed out a problem that has caused more problems, sometimes it was unavoidable. It was necessary to cause more problems in order to deal with the problem. I would like to just have the one problem that I've recognized, and I think most people are of that mind, but here's the key. When you recognize a problem like in a wrong way or in a harsh way or in a confrontational way, and not in a way that's full of grace, then you're almost certain to cause more problems because now you've offended somebody. So in addition to them being wrong, now they're offended. and then you point out that they shouldn't get offended, and then that makes a third wrong. So that's the example that I was using there. And yes, with struggle, there is I understand what you're saying about seeing it in a positive light, and denial, but I think my example of not normally seeing it as a positive is what I told the Marines this morning at the formation, because we just realized that it was kind of a revelation that our behavioral health specialist said. One of the Marines got into alcohol problems, and it was during a time that he was having a breakup with his girlfriend, and he was coping with alcohol. And the thing that we usually point to is, well, he drank too much alcohol. Well, that's a surface problem. Underneath that problem is that he was using the alcohol to cope instead of having a more positive way of coping. But beneath that problem was that he hadn't learned how to cope with problems in his life. And then below that problem, so 4 layers deep, was the reality that he didn't know that he was coping. And so when I'm talking about the root of the root of the root in our Facebook thread, that's what I'm talking about with sin and Christianity and Savior. And so it's very easy to brush that aside or silence Ben Watson when he's on the TV. But there are, sin and Christianity are ideologies. Race is an ideology. But just because something's an ideology doesn't mean it's wrong. I mean, being a Marine is an ideology. Having a military is an ideology. Having defense is an ideology. I mean, you could say pretty much everything on this planet is an ideology, but there's some ideologies that are true, and there's some ideologies that are false. My contention is that Christianity is an ideology that's true, and that race is an ideology that is false. Okay, so now, if I was going to take a true-false nature to it, now, are there ideologies that are neutral? Maybe. And I think it's also helpful if I point out, if I'm asked, I thought about this last night, why the sky is green, I am more inclined to reply, well, it's kind of gray right now. But I will also, if I feel like the person is really trying to figure out, if they really see it green and they're asking a question, why does it look green to me? I will try to figure out ways to explain why it could look green. Am I validating a green sky? I guess, maybe. Am I trying to validate it? Am I declaring an absolute truth of what color it is? No, that's not what I'm doing. So with the article, I wasn't using the article to prove that race was valid. And I never said that. What I said was that it disproved the claim that race was false, that race was no longer used, that no scientist, no expert uses it. Because the claim that you made was that no expert uses it. And at the end of the article, I think it was like the third paragraph from the bottom, it said how many scientists were still using race to characterize people, to classify people, and that's why I was saying that what you were saying was invalid. I was countering your point. I wasn't trying to make a new point. So hopefully that's helpful, and I appreciate that you said a lot of the things that you said, and I think that this forum is a lot better. Carl and I have very much difficulty texting back and forth, and it just has its limits, you know. And there has to be a lot of grace and a lot of clarification. And my request to him has been multiple times, don't mischaracterize me. But you know, it is what it is. So I not biased against color, but probably discuss as my handwriting's too difficult here, and I can't pause and re-go back to it. But I've covered a lot here. Sure, I mean, we can go on. It would be great to meet you again. So far, Ops is still in there with the CEO, and I still got to tell him about the issue. I thought it was good that you don't see diversity as the world does, going back to that and the whole Stephen King thing. I thought that was great. I agree that art requires diversity. I thought those excellent points that you made on there, and how you talked about there being a power imbalance when certain powers were trying to enforce a certain way of having diversity. You mentioned all originate from Africa. I thought it was Mesopotamia in the Middle East, but that's kind of beside the point. And we could have conversations on faith and stuff at a later date. The cumulative effects of diversity going back to they were before the training, to me, that just shows some nature. I think that if somebody's transformed by the Holy Spirit, then they are totally a new creation. They are a new man, and they might be tempted to go back to the way they were, but they're empowered by the Holy Spirit to live a new life. So I think that is huge. And that belief aspect that you've pointed out, I wanted to read this to you because I tweeted a response to somebody else. You know, since my computer's still not working, I'm on mobile devices, and I probably shouldn't be as much, but especially on Twitter. But I learn from other people and what they're doing here. And when you said that belief is more powerful than fact, boy, did I really latch on to that, and probably more than you really wanted me to. But you know, it is what it is. So it was in a reply to guys that were talking about why the economy tanked or all these things. So, and one guy was like, I lived this out, not just what you're spouting, but truly facts and all this stuff. And I said, belief is more powerful than fact. So powerful that it has the ability to transform subjective opinion and perception into facts inside one's mind. I said, you can see that happening everywhere, including this thread. And so you really helped me to articulate how powerful belief is, and understanding that you and I both recognize our biases and our confirmation biases, and we're open to the other person revealing to us what our biases are, really helps. It really helps in the conversation. It really helps going forward. And the fact that you mentioned that you didn't judge me, I thought was really, really good. You know, there's a couple things that we disagree on. I think, you know, one of the things that you said at the end was that agreement is not your goal. And so we differ on that a little bit, because I see agreement as a goal. of a conversation. And I think that anytime you're dialoguing with somebody, even if you decide to agree to disagree in an agreeable way, then you have agreed. And therefore, agreement can be the goal because you maintain a respectful attitude throughout, and you allow for disagreement. You see what I mean? Because you're agreeing to disagree. So to me, that's a both and I think it's a good goal when you're having dialogue with somebody, because it's like, well, if we're just going to reinforce each other's disagreements, then what's the point? We should be able to be open to the other person's point of view and allow ourselves to disagree with it. I think it's great to challenge belief systems, and I appreciate you challenging mine. I have put more thought into this to be better able to articulate why I don't think that I'm so deeply affected by race as a ideology, and why I can articulate it like as something neutral, but also help me recognize how it has negatively affected other people, maybe in different generations, or even people that are younger than me who grew up with being kind of brainwashed to categorize people. You know, both the poverty-stricken who are victim mindset and the supremacist people who are full of privilege have huge problems and kind of grew up that way. My background, and probably being put in the military early and being born, you know, decade and a half after the Civil Rights Movement, really kind of separated me from that. And I was going to say, I often try to win arguments, so I'm working on that. So that's, you were saying that you don't try to prove your point. I kind of do, and you probably saw that coming through, because I do think that there are right and wrong answers. I do think that when somebody you know, claims that the sky is green and they're trying to convince me that it is, they're wrong. Like flat earth, you know, it is wrong. And I think early on I probably should have said, while I agree with your overall theory, and I think I've said this multiple times, what I disagree with and what I'm having a hard time with is how it's being articulated as somewhat of an absolute, because it doesn't allow for other interpretation, it doesn't allow for other perception, it doesn't allow for anybody else's mindset. And it's pretty much Americanized too, because we don't really see as much of a race problem, definitely in Japan, and in some of the other places in the world. It's just that we see people different, and you know, people, I think, discriminate against what is different than them, and I think they do that because of sin. If the one other thing, you know, I touched on a little bit, you said that I could judge your spirituality in my other video, and then I went on about other things. I want you to know that I am not going to judge your spirituality. The reason that I ask about faith is because that's a baseline understanding, especially in ideology. And if we don't agree on what Christianity means, if we don't agree on what sin is, and so, you know, if we can't say that sin is a realistic ideology, that it is an actual thing, then, you know, we're not going to be able to get very far in other areas of our conversation, because we can't, we don't have that baseline. We have to have a foundation. So I think you were trying to build with me what is biologically viable. That was the word that was used for race. And I don't really have a foundation on what is biologically viable, because I don't have the training to be able to determine a biological validity. All I can go by is what the article said that many other scientists do, and that's what I went off of to collect it. So hopefully I have clarified my viewpoints, cleaned up the perceived contradiction, affirmed you and kind of what we were talking about. I'm not trying to win the argument, but understanding the points. And that was 24 minutes, much longer than my other one. I'll upload this. Once again, I appreciate you and all that you do, and Carlin and Wayne and our discussions. These are good. These are much more enjoyable to me than trying to convince my sister to stay married and trying to help my brother deal with my other brother who doesn't know how to manage a company and has squandered $1.1 million over the last year and is holding my dad's estate hostage while my mom confesses to me her 2-year homosexual lifestyle when we were kids that caused crazy negative effects on me and my older brothers, which have just become known to me. There's a Texas flag in the background. And that was probably TMI, but as we're getting to know each other and humanizing each other, sometimes it's helpful to bring out the past. All right, take care. I gotta get out of here. This is just so much fun. All right, let me see how long this takes to upload. See ya.